Welcome to DIY DEI. I'm your host, Tawanna Streater, and back with me today is Melissa B. Donaldson, the Senior Vice President and Chief Diversity Officer of Wintrust Financial Corporation. We are continuing the conversation on why diversity is important in the workforce. Thank you so much for being here, Melissa.
My pleasure, Tawanna. Thank you for having me back.
Always a pleasure. I want to continue the conversation. We ended our last discussion around imposter syndrome. Mm-hmm. And we started talking about coaching. But today I really want to focus on building a diverse pipeline. Okay. And why talent development is important. Mm-hmm. So how does a company, how do they go about building a pipeline of diverse talent?
Sure. I believe every company has some version of talent development. Mm-hmm. There's been promotions that have been happening all along. Mm-hmm. People have been moving to different parts of the organization all along. Yeah. But for some reason, when we start talking about being inclusive with all of that functioning, it tends to get a little murky, right? And what I say is, I'm really not asking you to do anything that you haven't already been doing. Right. Right? So if we're setting the performance objectives, so standard performance objectives. So everyone who's in a particular set of roles or in a particular department, you know what the expectations are. And we should also be sharing, well, what does sort of meets expectation looks like? And what would be just out of your wildest dreams, what would those results look like? Right? If we can get, that's kind of the basics out of the way, right? Then I think we need to take a look at, well, what is the makeup of the organization today, top to bottom? Mm-hmm. What tends to happen is there's a lot of diverse representation. The workforce is much more diverse at the entry 1 or 2 levels. Right. And a lot of times, the further up you go in the organization, the less diverse it gets. Right. So I think we have to insert in the middle somewhere. And we talk a lot about, from a diversity inclusion practitioner standpoint, we talk about that frozen middle. Right. That there is, you got the folks that are coming from the bottom up and the top down expectation, and you got that frozen middle.
I like how you phrase that.
How do we, right? So there's a lot of responsibility there. Mm-hmm. And then there's also, I think, a lot of sometimes angst around, well, if I make certain decisions, is that going to box me out for future roles, right? And I think that sometimes the, diversity, equity, and inclusion practices hadn't advanced as far and as fast as we'd like them to, because in a lot of ways it's still very much a personal conversation for a lot of folks. Yeah. So if I make these decisions, am I going to be missing out? Yeah. Am I going to be making something harder for myself? Why would I want to do that, right? Right. So with that in mind, I think the equitable approach is, what's the makeup of our organization today? And if we applied some of that same sort of logic as to how can we build that pipeline that is equitable, so an equitable, diverse bench of talent for various roles, and keeping in mind that, everybody's not going to get there at the same time. Right. But it would be great if, say, the leadership ranks had a similar kind of makeup as the frontline ranks. Right. So people can see themselves throughout. Right. And if we're not seeing that happening, then we have to ask ourselves some questions. Mm-hmm. What kind of decision-making have we been employing? And has that decision-making process, those thought processes, have they been rooted in fairness and objectivity? Right. Right? So fair doesn't always mean equal. We know that. Right. But are you weighing two people's performance the same way? Right. Or do you have a slightly more intense set of objectives for one type of person than you do for another type of person? And sometimes this is where a little bit of unconscious bias can creep in. Exactly. But I like to say, I think a lot of bias is conscious, quite conscious. Sometimes a lot of times we know exactly why we made certain decisions, right?
Yeah.
Or what do I want to see happen with this person in the future?
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So as leaders, they've got to balance all of that. And at the end of the day, I want you to build the team that's going to be productive and that you can be proud of.
Right.
And I want you to do so inclusively.
Right.
So that might mean that you need to look at how can I bring a different perspective to the team?
Yeah.
And what would that do for you as a team?
Yeah.
Chances are it's going to enrich your problem-solving capabilities, your decision-making capabilities, just brings another perspective to the table that before you didn't have the benefit of. So if we can look at it as a positive versus a must-do, you know, I think it's just altering how we're asking leaders to relate to this pipeline.
Yeah. It gives people who are coming into the organization, when you are looking at your, let's just say, pipeline, your employee base, and you are actually promoting within, that's attractive to me. That says that I have a growth trajectory within this company. Because ideally, we want our staff, our employees to stay a long time. Although I do believe that eventually employees will go elsewhere.
Of course.
But that doesn't mean I'm going to stop developing and helping that person grow because I still am invested in that person's growth and development.
Right.
So
Right.
I'm hearing companies should prioritize talent development.
From my perspective, absolutely.
But what does that talent development look like?
It could look like a lot of different things. It could look like, of course, on-the-job training. It could look like having a very clear mentoring program or process. It could look like access to coaching, executive coaching. It could look like having a sponsor, meaning someone's assigned to a senior executive who could open some doors, right? And then the quality and the quantity of the learning intellectual properties that are available, whether they were purchased from elsewhere or, you know, the company has its own way, its own brands, let's say, of leadership. I'm a big proponent of leadership. I spent many years facilitating lots of hours, thousands of hours of leadership development. So this is just kind of my space. And, you know, when we look at what's available, to me, if it's available, and if everybody has the password and credentials to get to some of these things, then it's what I call the horse race. Who's taking advantage? And even looking at the data to say, who's accessing it? So if everyone has access, who's really accessing it? Or is there perceived barriers to access, right? Some of that talent development could also look like we're going to have coffee with, right? So if Tawanna was the, you know, vice president of operations for the organization, we're going to have coffee with Tawanna. And we're going to pick 8 people, sit around the table, have coffee with Tawanna. It's an intimate conversation. So companies can be much more creative in what they do. I think aligning it with who they are as an organization. But certainly there are some, you know, best practice kinds of initiatives that you can undertake. And that's typically where the mentoring and the sponsorship and the coaching and things come into play. But how you go about making those matches and making those connections and the quality of the programming all makes a difference.
And we talked about this a little bit on the last show. I will go and find a mentor with the quickness. I think I identified where I am now at Shed. I identified 2 people. One in the department that I work in, and then someone that was in another department.
Good for you.
And I talked to my boss about it, said, I'm feeling like this, and I feel like I need a mentor who can help me just with some learning of some of the initiatives that we do. Mm-hmm. And I told her the two people. And she said, well, you already know development. Mm-hmm. So go ask this other person. I sure did. And she was flattered. Mm-hmm. Another thing is, I loved the initiatives that Rush implemented. Mm. And even in the Office of Philanthropy, we would be matched with a mentor. Mm-hmm. And it was like a quarterly thing. And I love that. The one thing I didn't like about it was sometimes, depending on who it was, you didn't feel like you could have those open conversations because you worked in the same department, you knew the same people. Mm-hmm. So I kind of prefer to have a mentor that is not, ideally not in the same company, but at least not in the same department. Mm-hmm. And other things that they did, which I loved, was appraisal time. You were coached on how to give impactful performance reviews. Mm-hmm. And for new managers such as myself, that was so helpful to me because I wanted to identify, things that my staff person was doing great. Mm-hmm. But I also wanted to be able to articulate those areas of opportunities that that person needed to work on that will help them get to the next level. Because let's be honest, we all have areas of opportunity.
Absolutely.
If we are, as my boss would say, if we are doing absolutely perfect and we are getting 4s on everything, then we're in the wrong job. We need to be CEO somewhere because there's nothing left for us to learn. So I just felt that was valuable to me. And mentoring and coaching, that was something that I started requiring. That was in the conversations during an interview. Mm-hmm. And I think I was talking to my mentee last night. I was like, I started doing that when I went to Rush. It was like, this is what I require, from my growth. Mm-hmm. I need this type of support and this coaching from my supervisor. Mm-hmm. And that was also the conversation my current boss and I had. And she came back with some additional questions, because some of the struggles I had was as a supervisor. And she said, well, what do you need from me? What would you need from me? And it was a productive conversation. So I love when we have leadership who is truly invested in that pipeline development and looking internally. Because like I said, that's a recruitment tool for me. If I know that I have a career in a company, not just I'm just going to get this, these skills and then I'm just going to bounce. If I know that I have a career within a company, I am more inclined to go and stay. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what would you tell someone who was looking for a job in a particular company? We know research, but what are the questions that they should be asking as it pertains to a company's DEI and just internal structures?
Well, first of all, let me acknowledge what you shared. It was so rich in so many different ways. It's really important. One really, really big element that you shared was that you had a sense of what was important to you. Yeah. You had a sense of how you needed to grow. Yeah. Right? Without that, you may get a cookie cutter approach. Yeah. Or this is what worked for me. Why won't this work for you? Kind of thing. But when it comes to mentoring and sponsorship, it's really helpful for the individual to have a sense of where am I heading? Yes. Right? And when you see the organization respond to you in that way, then you get the feeling this is an organization that has my best interests at heart. Exactly. And, by the way, I know everybody's not going to get promoted at the same time. Exactly. But if I can continue to have these kinds of experiences and conversations, at least where how I'm thinking, where I'm headed. And I think you have the resources available if you would allow me to access them. Yes. And then be able to build a support network that helps me to sort of internalize and actualize and activate what I've learned.
Yeah.
So kudos to you.
Thank you.
For taking that on. Now, what would I say to someone looking for a job? You need to know a little bit about what you have to offer and what's important to you, right? So, is it industry minded? So let's say going from, you're outside and you're looking at a particular job,
right.
A company to come on the inside. LinkedIn is your friend. We talked about this a little bit the last time. There's no reason why you shouldn't know something
exactly
about that organization.
It's not like it was when I was in college, flipping through a book.
No, when I was in college, when we had to go through the classifieds and I want to apply, and you're like, okay, so who works there, kind of thing, and. Even I employed some of those same techniques personally. That kind of got me on the path to when I got into CDW, for example. I had just moved to Chicago. I didn't know anybody here. And I rode down the street and saw a sign in the yard, "Watch Us Grow. Healthcare center or fitness center and daycare center coming soon." I was like, what? And... that was a company that also happened to be very much a promote from within. But then there's a recognition that there might be some gaps in the skills that they had that they were open to bringing somebody else in from the outside. So I got that opportunity. But I would not have, were it not the good old-fashioned writing a note, a thoughtful, we call them cover letters at the time, right? A thoughtful cover letter that said, hey, I'm new to town. I have a long background in technology. I read about you in X publication. Kudos on your achievements.
Research.
Just wondering if there's any tips you might be able to share with me about expanding my job search.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Next thing I knew, I was getting an interview.
Oh, wow.
Right? And I believe there's angels everywhere.
Absolutely.
Standing ready to help you.
Absolutely.
You just got to get a word.
Yeah.
Got to get a signal.
Yes.
You can't just show up. That's not the signal.
Right.
So we have to have a sense of what do I think I want to do?
Yes.
And why do I think this is an organization that could be a good match for me? And I also like to think of it as, it's a bilateral contract.
Yeah. Yeah.
I agree to come in every day. That was before the whole hybrid situation, but I agree to work every day.
Every day.
To the best of my ability and fulfill those standard performance objectives and to contribute to the best of my ability to the success of the organization. And in exchange, you, organization, promise to pay me fairly. Give me opportunity.
Yes.
And to treat me with dignity and respect.
Yes.
Bilateral.
It sounds so simple.
It sounds so simple, but guess what? We deserve.
Yeah.
It's too many options.
Yeah.
To be in a situation where you feel disrespected.
Yeah.
You feel unseen.
Yeah.
You feel unheard. And even if it's the most marquee brand you can think of, if that's the way you feel, if the company's not connecting with you that way, and you've really in earnest done some things to try and put yourself out there, be visible, those kinds of things, take initiative, it's probably not the right environment for you.
Yeah.
And every place is not the right place for everybody.
I agree.
And I do think that careers are seasonal.
I agree.
Right? I came in, I did what I said I was going to do. It's just, we've kind of run our course.
Sometimes you're just going to be there to develop certain skills and go on elsewhere.
And it's not hopping.
Right.
Right? And I know that, some of the younger generations get, sort of,
antsy.
No. They get... I'm trying to think of a nice word. They kind of get, tagged with that hopper mentality. Yeah. And it's like, well, if we stop and really talked about from a generational standpoint, what's not working for you here? Yeah. And I think you would hear some really intelligent responses.
They are saying, I refuse to be somewhere where I am not valued. And I am disrespected. I have had those conversations.
And I don't see myself reflected.
Exactly.
In
or growing.
Successful roles, right?
Yeah.
And so you got to admire that.
Yeah.
You got to admire that.
Yeah.
And so I think generations, I think we can learn from each other. Younger generations need to learn from us who've been at this for a minute.
Yeah.
Here's some of the pains and strains that I had to go through. Here's what I learned.
Yeah.
Maybe you don't have to do it that way now. But these are some things that just are going to be tried and true, right? Everybody wants to be treated with dignity and respect.
Absolutely.
There is a protocol to the organization.
Absolutely.
Right? Even if a company professes to have open door policy, there's still a protocol. You just don't go,
knocking
CEO,
on the door.
You got a minute? No.
No.
You still got to respect people's time and things like that, right? So all of those things, I would say, think about what you want to do. Maybe there's really an industry that you really want to get into.
Yeah.
See if you can find people who are already in that industry or do that kind of work.
Yeah.
And if it's a particular company you're interested in, see if you can find somebody who's already in that company who would be willing to spend some time with you.
Yeah.
LinkedIn's great for that.
Yeah.
You could search by company, right? You could Tawanna Shed or Tawanna nonprofit, right? You can search and you'll get all kinds of stuff all over the place, all over the world, really. So you got to do your homework.
Yeah. And us older folks. Well, I know I do.
If you older, I'm ancient, but keep going.
I'm absolutely flattered when people want to come to me and talk to me and learn, how did I get into this? I'm flattered because I'll talk all day about my career path because it was not a traditional one.
Yeah.
But something you said was how we have these lower level employees, and they get to a certain space. They're overlooked. They are overlooked. They get discouraged. And I love when companies take a look at those lower level employees and they think, what are we not doing right? Because if we are a company that says we promote from within, but we are not promoting those employees, what are we not doing right? And I absolutely believe in professional development because I'm in nonprofit and we don't have the money to just go to all kinds of conferences. I would look for free webinars or webinars that were really, minimal, cheap.
Yeah.
And we would often sit at one another's desks, the three of us, and we would pay for one person, but we would sit at that desk and we would all learn
You're still
something.
in cable.
We had to figure something out.
Right.
We had to figure something out.
Sure.
But honestly, the cheapest development opportunities is talking to people.
Absolutely.
And learning. Like I said, people they are flattered if you go to them and ask them questions about their career and their pathways. And you just take an interest in learning from them.
And, people love to talk about themselves as well. Okay. And even with that, I still think that there is a right and a wrong way to do that, right? I once had a young woman in a company reach out to me and ask me to be her mentor. I said that I would. She proceeded to ask me, well, when can you come over and see me? Conversation was over. Because
you're not even taking the initiative.
Help me help you. Right? So you called me. I said yes.
Right.
And now you want me to come see you in another building? I'm thinking you got something wrong. Right. You probably need to go think about that a little bit more.
Right.
So, hate to admit it, but you tend to remember people like that too. And as you're thinking about different opportunities, you really might go, I don't know if I can trust this person to be responsible with how we go about doing this. And that's not at all to say people can't change. Clearly, that person needs some coaching and some insights.
Right.
But the mentor is not always the person to do that.
Right. Yeah.
That approach may have worked beautifully for her before. It didn't work for me as somebody you wanted information from at the time. So I think if we can show, frankly, respect for the individual and their time. And I'm not talking about respect from a hierarchical standpoint, everybody's time is limited and precious.
Yeah.
Right?
Basic respect.
So if you want to have time with me, set something up.
Yeah.
I may give you, call my assistant and set something up and we'll make it happen. But I'm not going to chase you down to get information to you, right? So I think you mentioned individuals being overlooked, to which I say maybe. Mm-hmm. Because there's some people who they're perfectly fine where they are.
Yeah.
And we have to respect that as well. An organization needs everybody at every level.
Yeah.
Those that are making it rain and those that are keeping the lights on. We need them all. Okay. I think the difference is when a department leader or even the leadership team looks at the talent in the team, have we really been assessing the talent and at various levels?
Yeah.
And are we reaching to continue to staff a pipeline, a bench of talent that we can move and slot into different parts? Because so many companies, I think so many leaders are so quick to go for search or, go to external, outreach to do some recruiting. Yeah. There once was a saying that says, why are you searching for diamonds when you got rubies at your feet?
Come on now.
And you just need to find it, polish it, and put it in the right place and see how brilliant it can be.
I love it. And you have heard it here, everybody. Are you a diamond or a ruby?
You could be a ruby on your way to a diamond.
Either way.
Got to be polished.
You are in that pipeline of talent.
What Mr. Miyagi said, wax on, wax off. Right?
Well, thank you so much for coming in again today to talk about how diversity is important in building that talent pipeline. I might ask you to come back.
Anytime, Tawanna. Love talking to you.
But thank you so much.
Anytime.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Well, join us next time as we really dive deeper into some key conversations about coaching and mentoring, authenticity. And I am your host, Tawanna Streater, and have a good evening.